What's going on, guys? Welcome to PNP, and this is your boy Dave giving you another fantasy spotlight. Today it's on DJ Moore. So before we get started and breaking down DJ Moore, let's make sure you subscribe to the channel and make sure you follow us on all our social medias at Panther Nation PC, and shout out to Underdog Fantasy. Use the code PNP to get a deposit match up to $100. And it really helps out the channel, guys. So please go to UnderdogFantasy.com and try to win you some money. It's a fun time at Underdog Fantasy. Best ball, pick'ems, things of that sort. They cover not just football, but baseball and MMA and I'm about to say baseball again, but and WNBA as well. So and golf. So check them out. Like I said, use the code PNP and sign up there. Become a Patreon. A lot of my Patrons got to see this video days before. So if you go to patreon.com/PantherNationPC and sign up, and you'll have an opportunity to get these videos before I post them to the public. All right, DJ Moore, the number one wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. We can argue that he's probably he's definitely one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Let's keep it a buck. When we talk about some of the best wide receivers in the NFL, we got to understand the quarterback situation of those particular wide receivers. When you talk about your Davante Adams, you got Aaron Rodgers throwing to him for the bulk of his career, and now he has Derek Carr throwing to him. When you think about somebody like a Cooper Kupp, he had Matthew Stafford. So when you take that into consideration, when you start talking about the great quarterback, sometimes having even if it's just a decent quarterback, helps out that number one wide receiver a lot. DJ Moore hasn't exactly had that his past 3 years, but we'll get into some of the data that we got, and then we'll go from there. So some quick facts about DJ Moore when it comes to his fantasy points per game. Based on the chart, his best season was 2019 when you talk fantasy points per game at 15th with 15.4 points a game. The last two seasons are around 14 points a game, which is good for 29th and 27th respectively. When you talk about fantasy points, he was 18th last year, 25th in 2020, and 16th in 2019. Couple things to consider there. One, 2019 and 2020, he missed the game. Last season, played all the games. Very impressive to say the least. He's a very durable wide receiver. He's the only wide receiver in the NFL in the last 3 seasons that's gotten at least 1,200 scrimmage yards. All right? Keep that in mind. Only wide receiver that got 1,200 scrimmage yards. That tells you about his durability. It tells you about his consistency, about what he gets on a week-to-week basis. So DJ Moore on a week-to-week basis tends to be more dependable. But we'll get into some of the challenges with him. But overall, I think this is a really good year to finally see that next step. And I will elaborate a little bit more as we go through some more of the data. But in the meantime, I want to go through some of the other things that are going on with regards to DJ Moore. All right. So one thing about the notes. All right. DJ Moore had 163 targets. And that's good for 6th in the NFL. In my opinion, that target count alone tells me this is enough to me to say he's got wide receiver 1 potential from a fantasy perspective. Okay? So for me, when I consider the wide receivers that I want to take, the big thing I'm concerned about is targets, right? Because targets turn into catches, catches turn into touchdowns. The more targets you have, the better chance you might have. You might get some you're going to get more receptions, and you're going to get more touchdowns. And there was only 5 wide receivers that had more targets than DJ Moore. Cooper Kupp, Davante Adams, Deontay Johnson, Justin Jefferson, and Stephon Diggs. They had more targets than DJ Moore last season. And most of those individuals are within the top 10 when it comes to fantasy points, and some of them are within the top 5. Okay? The thing about DJ Moore, ultimately when it comes down to it, is the fact that his career high in a season when it comes to touchdown has only been 4. He's only had, so in the last 3 seasons, he's gotten 4 touchdowns. In 2018, he only had 2. But he didn't play as much as in 2018 either. But He's only had 4 touchdowns in his previous 3 years each. And I think that's something that needs to rise this year, and I think it will rise this year with the quarterback situation potentially improving. I wanted to put that bullet because we always talk about quarterbacks, and DJ Moore hasn't had the benefit of playing with the All-Pro quarterback every season, or even a Pro Bowl quarterback every season. I mean, we're talking Sam Darnold, Teddy Bridgewater, Kyle Allen, Cam Newton in 2019 for a couple games, but he played hurt. So when you take into account the quarterbacks that DJ Moore had, he hasn't exactly had the best or even above average quarterback play in his previous 3 seasons. I mean, that's just the reality of the fact. And I think him having those quarterback challenges impacted his catch percentage. Now, so the way I calculate catch percentage is the number of receptions divided by the number of targets. He had 93 catches last season, all right, which is his career high too, by the way. But his catch percentage was around 57%. Those 5 guys that are mentioned above, and among other folks who are ranked ahead of him, they tend to have a catch radius in the 62% in the 62% and above range, right? And some of that could attribute to quarterback play. Some of that could be attributed to drops. But what it boils down to is, in my opinion, we have to get that number up at least to 62%. I think if we can get that number up to 62%, we're going to be cooking on some gas. Now, some of these wide receivers are at 75%. That would be optimal. Like if DJ Moore can have a pretty good quarterback, get 75% of the catches, of the targets that's thrown to him, he could be. We're talking top 5 because his odds are pretty high. He'll probably definitely increase his touchdowns as well. So that's just something to consider when we're talking about DJ Moore. Now, my final thoughts on DJ Moore, man. Right now, his average draft position is 45th, and that's good. 45th overall, 16th among all wide receivers. I think Baker Mayfield is going to end up being the best quarterback he's played with over the last 3 seasons. I mean, he didn't get to play with a healthy Cam, so to speak. And he played with a rusty Cam this last season. That had to learn the playbook, things of that sort. Sam Darnold really wasn't the guy. Teddy Bridgewater, when he had Teddy Bridgewater in 2020, Teddy Bridgewater pretty much distributed the targets. I mean, in 2020, Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore pretty much averaged the same fantasy points per game, and Curtis Samuel was actually ranked higher in fantasy points than DJ Moore, but not by much, by like a point or two. It wasn't that much at all. But I say all that to say that we just need to see him get them targets up as well. And I think with Baker Mayfield, he's going to have that opportunity to do so. I think his touchdown count is going to climb this season. I mean, I think he's been sitting at 4 TDs per season for the last 3 years. I think that's going to rise up this year. And that's what I'm anticipating, and I think because of that, I am much higher on DJ Moore this year than I have been. From that standpoint, I think he's a fringe wide receiver 1 right now. He's getting drafted as a middle range wide receiver 2. I have him as a 3rd round grade in fantasy, and I think that's about the sweet spot. Most of the time, he's getting caught up in the 4th round. He's 45th overall. So that means he's getting taken in the middle to the end of the 4th round. All right, and in 10 team leagues, he's getting taken in the 5th. So for me, I think his TDs are going to increase this year. I think because he's got a better quarterback, I think his catch percentage is going to increase this year. And like if he gets up to 62%, you're talking like another additional 10 to 15 more catches. So you're talking over 105 balls caught by him. And that's a phenomenal year. That's in a PPR league. I mean, that's 15 more points, 10 to 15 more points, maybe 20 more points, depending on the target share, right? So when you take that into account, he increases his TDs. To put it in perspective, the guys that are ahead of him in targets, the 5 players that were ahead of him in targets, the least amount of TDs those 5 players had was 8. If he can just get to 8, we're cooking. We are cooking on grease. That is top 10. He would be a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy if he can get up to 8 TDs with the catches that he had last year. He would have boosted up to a top 10 guy. And I think he has the potential to do that this year. So, from my standpoint, I wouldn't have a problem having DJ Moore as a low-end wide receiver 1 if you make the decision to go running back in the first 2 rounds. And then in the 3rd round, DJ Moore sitting there near the bottom or in the middle of the 3rd. Wouldn't have an issue taking him whatsoever. But that's all I have with regards to DJ Moore. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. This is Dave from PNP. I'm out, guys. Peace.